support. Turning on, turning off the music, videoing. We really appreciate it. And on behalf of the Historical Society, I want to welcome you here this afternoon. We know it's a beautiful afternoon to be indoors, but we think it's going to be well worth your time to hear this wonderful firsthand account of Kenneth Horton's World War II experiences. And I'm going to turn the program over immediately to Joe Chesnut, who is, many of you know, Thomasvillian also, and World War II historian who shared some of his stories of accounts from veterans with us previously. So Joe, I'll let you take over. I may need to turn this down a little. Am I getting
it is too loud.
Too much squeal for Joe here?
It may not be. It is too loud. Is that better?
Does that sound better, Joe?
I think so. Thank you. I'm a little hoarse. It's a pleasure to be back home. Home has been defined. I was hoping that Lady Booth Garner would be here today so I could brag on the fact that I remember from the 12th grade that the definition of home in one of Robert Frost's poems was that home is where the heart is. And Thomasville is certainly home for me and my family, as well as it is for the speaker today. Which brings me to introducing Ken Horton. In 1975 or 6, I was at a party in Birmingham, Alabama. And I was sitting on the grass with my wife and some friends in the back yard of the person that was having the party. And I heard this southern drawl from sitting right behind me, this real female southern drawl that said, well, my daddy grew up in Thomasville, Georgia. And I recognized the town. I turned around and said, who are you? She said, my name is Susan Island. Morgan Island was in the choir that I was in. I said, well, you Morgan? Yeah, I'm Morgan's wife. But my daddy, Ken, grew up in Thomasville. I said, well, that's where we're from. So that's how I first became aware of who Ken Horton was. Then when I got interested in World War II stories and talking to combat veterans, I was impressed with the fact that he told me that he was a torpedo dive bomber. And that, in fact, I mentioned to Donald Watt, one of my cousins, about Ken Horton. He said, listen, he's in the history books. You read about the Battle of Leyte Gulf, he sank a Japanese aircraft carrier. Now that really impressed me. So to talk to Ken, he's like many veterans, he doesn't talk about himself. He's what I call a hero, even though he would deny that. Most survivors of combat in World War II say the heroes are the ones in the cemeteries. Well, there are some heroes that survived, and he's one of them, and he's here to talk to you today. Now, the last little story I want to say and introduce him is in 1981, Susan and Morgan Island came with Margaret and me, Margaret, my wife, to Thomasville, and they were staying at my mother's house, I believe. And when the introduction was done from the driveway up to the back porch, and my mother said, and who was your father? And she said, Ken Horton was my father. And Mama said, wait just a minute. She turned around and went in the house, came back out with a newspaper, Thomasville Times-Enterprise, of Rose Show Weekend, 1981, in which she said, let me read you this. 35 years ago today, Rose Show, Kenneth, in italic, Demon Horton, dive bombed the reviewing stand at the Rose Show and ran everybody off the reviewing stand on Broad Street 35 years ago today. And I said, well, he would do something like that? What's this Demon? Well, his nickname. And I've just heard several people come up to him and say, Demon, how you doing? So they haven't forgotten that his nickname is Demon Horton. And he's now published a book, which he'll talk about now. But it's my distinct pleasure to stand here and introduce to you, in my view, Thomas County, Georgia's most decorated combat veteran of World War II. Two Navy Crosses. Kenneth Demon Horton. Watch the step.
Well, I want to tell you all again, as I've said a many times, it's good to be back in Thomasville. Thomasville, as all of you know, most of you here, I grew up here. My dad had a dairy out off the Freedom Road, later on out off the Payville Road, had a sign business here, so he kept us busy. My brother, my sister, and I kept us quite busy. But I went on into when I was at University of Georgia, the Navy, with several of us had gone over and signed up about going into the Navy. And the Navy called while I was at Athens and got me into the Navy. And from there on, went through various phases of flight training. There at Athens, down at the University of Tampa, and then back out Olathe, Kansas, down to Corpus Christi, Texas, got my wings, sent me down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and that's where I became a torpedo pilot. I flew the Avenger, which at that time was the largest single-engine airplane in the world. It was a lot of fun to fly, if you like flying, and I did. And the Avenger was just a lot of fun to fly. Went on through that and went through test pilot school later on. The Navy had needed some test pilots. I'd gone up to a factory up in Trenton, New Jersey to pick up some planes, and they were just running out of pilots. They couldn't get enough pilots in to test fly the plane, so they sent me through test pilot school, and then I became a test pilot, and Lord, that just opened up doors to everything else. Following that, Navy sent me out to Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiians, and of course that that wasn't one of the states then, that was just a territory. From Hawaii, they sent me out. I was attached to an air group on the USS Essex air group carrier, and I was a member of the torpedo squadron in the USS. We did most of the, you might say, sorties or attacks against shipping. Torpedo pilots, that's what we were trained for, and that's what we did. We went after Japanese shipping, their aircraft carriers, their battleships, whatever they had. Is this coming through all right? Everything's all right? Okay. And that's what they sent after. And I might mention this. I don't know how much time we got, but whatever we got, we'll just use whatever we have. But I want to mention this. The very first ship that I sank, we were down off the island of Mindanao, which is the southernmost island in the Philippines, and one of our fighter pilots got hit by anti-aircraft fire, and his plane got on fire, and he bailed out. And came down and got in his little rubber life raft about the size of a bathtub. He got in his little rubber life raft. Well, the Japanese over on the island of Mindanao saw him in that raft. They got in a PT boat, went out to get him. They were going to capture him. Well, our fighter pilots got it there, and they strafed that PT boat, set it on fire. Well, right after that, the skipper of the PT boat got out, and he had two oarsmen. Or just as fast as they could to get back ashore. That was my first ship. I was about half a mile away, and I saw them roaring like crazy. And boy, I set the 250 caliber machine guns, I lined them up in my sights, and I sank them. That was my first ship. I sank 6 altogether. If you want to count that one, make it 7. But we worked primarily up and down the Philippines, east and west, starting in the Marianas Islands, Marshall Islands, Philippine Islands, then all the way over to the China coast, and from there down into the South China Sea was our area of operation. And I might mention that the first combat flight I had was we had gone ashore over at the Marines were going to land on Tainan. Even the Japanese did not know that, but they had gone out and off Guam and set railroad rails down in the water to trap our landing craft when they were bringing the Marines ashore. They would impale them on these, and they had their guns zeroed in right where they would hit those rails, and they could just wipe them out. Well, our job was to go out and bomb those rails, get them out of the water, and we did. After we did that, the squadron skipper says, okay, you fellows clear to go after targets of opportunity. Okay, so I'm cruising around the island out there, and all of a sudden we're going by the highest peak on the island of Saipan. Tracer shells, cannon shells, machine gun fire was coming up at us from that a little old grass shack up on top of that mountain. So we dropped down, got out of the tracer, pulled around behind it, and I hit them with 4 rockets. I had the Avenger. We had 8 high velocity rockets. These rockets had the same explosive power as a 6-inch naval shell, which is a lot. And we came in and I had 8 of those. Well, I hit them with 4 of them and just knocked that off the mountain altogether, just wiped it out. And you might say that was my real first combat flight. From that, we went on and further to the west and hitting Japanese shore installations, warehouses, barracks, targets of opportunity, we called them at that time. And I remember you might say the very first real ship that we went after. One of our submarines had picked up a Japanese tanker coming down from Japan off the western side of the island of Luzon, which is northern island in the Philippines. This was coming down on the western side, riding very high in the water. So the squadron commander dispatched me and another pilot over to go over there and sink it. And we went over there and we made our runs on it, and we got one hit. And we found out later on who was it that got that hit. And we found out it was my torpedo. Mine was set to run shallow. The other pilot, his was set to run deep. So regardless of where the ship sat in the water, one or the other would have gotten it. And we figured out from the photos that we took of the drop that it was mine that got it. So I got credit for that. They send these tankers up and down from Japan all the way down to Borneo. All of you know that Japan has no oil, minerals, anything like of their own. And they sent us down, they send these tankers and cargo ships back and forth to support the island there, to support their war efforts. And so we sank that, was my very first 25,000 ton tanker. We got that one, and the next one we got on, we were in, this is when they were making the landings at Lady Gulf. All of you remember that, those that remember the old enough to remember or have read about it, they were making the landings at Lady Gulf. The Japanese were sending everything they had, up from Borneo, over from Nancy Shoda, which we called the Japanese islands at that time, and from over on Okinawa. Formosa then. And so they were sending everything in on us, and one of the ships that they sent was an aircraft carrier. And they sent us up, they first sent 8 torpedo pilots. After that, but they found out there was another one off over a few miles over to the west, so they split us up, and 4 of us went after one of the aircraft carriers, 4 went over to the other one. And out of the 4 I was one of those 4. Out of those 4, I was the only one, for whatever reason, got a hit on that carrier. I think what it was probably some of them were coming into the sun, and they just couldn't line up properly on it. But anyway, my torpedo came in, and I hit it on the port side, which is the left side for you non-maritime types. But so the left side came in and hit it on the port side of midships, and had a great, tremendous explosion, and down it went. That was the first, you might say, capital ship that I sank. Might go on from a little bit further than that. We were hitting targets in Manila Bay. Manila Bay was just, the Japanese, that was just great for them. They had, any of you ever been to Manila or familiar with it, Dewey Boulevard, which comes around on the southwest side of Manila, along Manila Bay there, had all these warehouses. Japanese had warehouses, storage, tie up where the ships could anchor and so forth, and the military ships would anchor out in the bay. The bay itself was somewhat shallow, but they had a channel going all the way from, you might say, the Manila area, all the way west, out past Corregidor, which is right at the mouth of the bay there, and then on out. Well, as we were going over there, 2 of the planes in this group carried torpedoes. Mine was one of them. The rest of them would carry, we had armor-piercing, 1,600-pound, 1,000-pound, 500-pound armor-piercing bombs to tackle whatever targets we found of opportunity there. 2 of us had torpedoes. Well, mine, I called the skipper and asked permission to make a run on it. So he okayed it, and I dropped down to make a run on this heavy cruiser. Their heavy cruisers some of them were as big as our battleships. It was tremendous size. We dropped down, and he was headed due west. He was headed toward Corregidor. He was going to get out of there. But he saw me coming, and he made a turn, sharp turn to starboard, to the right. Made a sharp turn to the right. He figured if I sank him, he would go up into the mud. The ship would sink in the mud, and the Japanese could send it later on and could recover it. They could bring it up, patch it up, and continue to use it. So he made a sharp turn to the right, and when he did, I was coming right broadside. I dropped my torpedo, and this time mine was set low, and it came in under his armor belt. And these things had anywhere from 8 to 12 inches of steel armor belt around these cruisers and battleships. And mine came in under the armor and sank it. And sure enough, he ran right on up into the mud there, and down he went. Thought he had it saved the ship. The next morning, our dive bombers came in, straight down, and they split it from stem to stern, wiped it out completely there. So that took care of that. While we were in around the Philippines, we had things to happen, funny things. I remember one time we were doing some barracks over there that the Japanese had, and they had them peppered all over. This was on the northernmost island of Luzon there, and we were over there hitting little grass fields. They had planes out there on them, barracks out there, and whatever the targets were. We had back aboard the ship, we'd have, from time to time, we'd have these poker games. And guys playing poker, and if you made a mistake or made a wrong bid or something like that, you had to ante up into the poker game. And over a period of time, we built up a pretty good pot. And the pot was for the first pilot in our squadron that shot down a Japanese plane. He would get the pot. Now that pot back then was $500. $500 then is $5,000 probably now. And that was a lot of money. And somebody let out and said, hey, there's a Japanese plane right south of what they call a Betty, our code name for a Betty, which is a Japanese bomber. And boy, we forgot whatever we were doing. We all took out because we wanted that pot. And we all took off after. Come to find out it was a B-24, American B-24 up from Guadalcanal. The pilot was on our radio frequency and he heard us. He said, hey fellas, he said, y'all take it easy. He said, I'm a long way from home. I need all the help I can get to get back. We tucked our tail between our legs and we took off. Went on about our business at it. And so he got away there. We had a lot of, you had to have a little bit of fun, I guess, when you go along, because it was quite serious there. And on and on and on. Later on, that was my third ship that I sank. I sank 6, and you want to count the little rowboat, that's 6. But later on, we were just like we're talking about on this, making raids all across the island there, and over on the east side of the island of Luzon, which is the northernmost island, is a long peninsula coming down south, and up on this peninsula there, very narrow peninsula, these big, tall eucalyptus trees, which were all over the Philippines there. But around behind this, right back around here, the Japanese had 3 destroyer escorts tied up close up, almost under these trees, where they couldn't be seen, even by planes flying over. They couldn't be seen. So we were coming down around it, so I decided to pull up this peninsula and see what's up there. Found those 3 ships up there. I hit them with 8 rockets, set all 3 of them on fire. I didn't know then if I had sank it or not. I found out later that I did. And so that gave me credit for 6 ships sank. Awards later on that I got, you might say end of the war, I got 2 Navy Crosses, Distinguished Flying Cross, 4 Air Medals. I don't know what all is, a lot of campaign medals there, but I guess you might say those were the costs. So the Navy did recognize or accept the fact that we were doing a good job, successful over there. went on through there, I guess you might say, shortly after that. I'm kind of going along through it, and we'll do some discussion later on if you have any questions there. But I remember on one of the very last flight I had, we were headed back to the east, to Hawaii, and of course back to the States. And this very last flight I had, just a beautiful day, just like the weather we see out here. And we were out flying. We were too far east. I didn't need my gunner. I did not need my radio radar man. I just had empty seat. Aboard the ship, we had a man that wanted. He was come to find out later on, it was Joe Rosenthal. You remember Joe Rosenthal was the man that took the picture of the Marines that put the flag up on Iwo Jima. Joe Rosenthal was on the ship as a war correspondent, and Joe wanted to make one last trip, go around, take some pictures, and just get to see what the fleet looked like. So he and I were up, flew all the way around, and just that was our last flight. 3.5 hours, we just cruised around over the fleet just to see who was there, what they were kind, and so forth. And that was our last flight over there. Came back east, came back home. We came into Seattle, got on the train, no planes then, come out on the train, got back here to Thomasville. You know, my dad, we had the farm here, the deer and all like that. I came back and I shot quail. And y'all know what that is. I don't know what's happened to the quail. I haven't seen them here. Maybe some of you fellows can tell me about it, but we had quail then. And I remember going out there and having quail hunts. I was here for about 2 weeks. And I shot quail, sent me back out to Hawaii. And I was out there, I was a flight instructor for combat pilots coming out for training to go on out further west. Just real good. We worked from about 7:30 in the morning till about 4:30 in the afternoon, and that was your day's work. One day while we were there in the office there, a fellow came in from over at the sub base, over at Pearl Harbor sub base. He said, I need one volunteer from a carrier-based pilot, and I need a volunteer from a patrol plane pilot. They wanted them for air-sea rescue submarines where pilots and crews were shot down or they had engine trouble or something like that, had to sit out in the water. These submarines would go in at night and pick them up. And they wanted a carrier-based pilot and a patrol plane pilot to help get these guys back to their ships, their squadrons, or wherever they came from. Because if they didn't do it, they'd get on some little old merchant ship and sit there for a month and just do nothing but, look at the seagulls and just have fun. So, but anyway, I volunteered as one because I'd never even seen it. Well, I'd seen a submarine from a distance, never been on one. So we got on the submarine, and they accepted me. I got on the submarine, high tide the next morning, we headed out. Got all the way out, and I'll have to say this, you ladies will kind of have to excuse me a little bit, but we got out on the submarine, and one of the sub-officers, they never, if any of you are familiar, they never argue with each other. Sub guys, they get along and work hours after hour and never raise their voice, never look bad at a guy or shake the fist at him or anything. They just got along great. But one of them asked me, he says, do you fellas get flight pay or do you get diving pay? And I lied to him. I said both. And the skipper over there heard me. And it made him mad. He took his cigar out of his mouth and ground it down in his coffee cup. And I knew I'd gotten to it. They got even with me. A little bit later on, I had to use the head, which is a toilet in the Navy. We call it the head. I had to go to the head. Well, when you use the toilet on a submarine, downside the commode there's a wheel. You got to turn that wheel to even up the pressure between the inner hull and the outer hull of the submarine. That equalizes the pressure. Then you reach down, you've got a long lever, you pull that long lever up, and that flushes it. I didn't know about turning that wheel. They didn't tell me about turning that wheel. When I got ready to move, I reached down and pulled up that lever, and it's just like getting hit in the seat in the rear end with a fire hose. I mean, it completely blew me up off the seat there. They got even with me. But we finally had a laugh about that. We proceeded on out west, got out beyond Midway, And we were sitting there one morning listening to Armed Forces radio, and they said our B-29s had dropped a atomic bomb on Hiroshima. We said, what in the world is an atomic bomb? We didn't know. 3 days later, they dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki. For about 3 days after that, the war was over. We just turned around and came back to the States. And that was, I came back to the squadron where I was, and everything just practically slowed down to nothing. So, and my time was up. This was in 1945, into 1945, came on back to the States, and eventually wound up in Jacksonville. And I was working there with Flowers Baking Company, doing flying for Flowers Baking Company, and some advertising for them. And I was there, met the woman that I married, LaWanna Westbury from over at Jessup. She and I married down there. And then shortly after that, the Navy called me back in as a flight instructor, sent me down to Miami. Might mention before that, I flew with the Blue Angels for about a year and a half. Not as one of their acrobatic pilots, but they had a torpedo plane. We had a little 100-pound bomb hung up in the bomb bay. They out in the open out there, where they'd have these air shows out in the middle of the field, they set up a big old wooden shack out there. And I'd come in real low, drop a 100-pound bomb, blow up that wooden shack. The FAA got involved in that and said, hey, that's too dangerous. If that thing got held up in your bomb bay rack, or you dropped it too late or something like that, or it hit and ricocheted off over there, you might wipe out some spectators over there watching the air show. So they made us quit, and that was the end of my time with the Blue Angels. But it was fun. But I agree too that it was a dangerous thing to do. Coming in 100 feet, drop a bomb, and then take off and watch it blow up that little shack there. So that pretty well wrapped up my experiences there. They called me back in as a flight instructor. This time I was flying fighter pilots, Corsairs, the U-bird we call it, which was a lot of fun to fly. Very acrobatic, very fast for a prop-driven plane. Just a lot of fun to fly. And I instructed in that pilots that were calling back on active duty for the Korean War, and getting them trained up and ready to go into squadrons and so forth. So, and then from that, they sent me to Pensacola, where I became a gunnery and formation instructor. From that, back out to the West Coast, and I was skipper of what we call an early warning squadron. They send planes out way out ahead of the ship, way out ahead of the task group, maybe 250, 300 miles out, and we would set up a barrier. And if we got out west of the Philippines, we could see Japanese, the MiGs taking off at Shanghai. And we could pick them up and follow them all along. Of course, we report back to our ship what we saw. And that was my last, you might say, active duty in the Navy. Of course, shortly after that, I went into a reserve squadron just there, and then retired from the Navy. So that, might say, is my career there in the Navy. Back and forth here to Thomasville, visiting my parents, visiting my friends, things going on at school, whatever. George, you know quite well there, so we had a lot of fun doing it. All right, I'm doing a lot of talking up here, so if you have any questions or discussion anyone like, why, let's just see what we can do. Yeah, Joe.
Tell them about your brother.
My brother? Yeah, that was, might mention that. I knew that my brother was a crew chief on a B-24. He'd gone through school down at Biloxi, where they had a school down there to teach repair, remodeling, overhauling aircraft engines. And he found out later, and he told me about it. He says, boy, he found out I was getting into flying myself. He said, boy, I want you to watch those propellers. Watch those propellers. Those things will kill you. What was happening at night, they have these people out there, they're turning up these engines, they remodel these engines, And they out there, you have to put at least an hour's time on them before you can ship them out to a squadron somewhere. And they had these engines turning up. Sometimes these guys would walk through there, going back to the barracks, walk right into a propeller. They would find them splattered all over the walls, somewhere like that. And he told me, he says, boy, he says, watch those propellers. When you're out there around airplanes, he said, watch those propellers. Of all things, that's what killed him. I was out on the, we were out around Kwajalein, and he and I had been corresponding back and forth, and I was going out, and I was going to meet him out at Kwajalein. And we had to ship, one morning we had a notice that we had to fly a plane in to Kwajalein, pick up the mail for the ship and the ships around it, and fly it back out to the ship. So I asked the skipper, could I do it? I said, my brother's over there on that island, and I want to go over and meet with him. And he was crew chief on a B-24. They were going down in some of the islands, or hitting the islands over there. So he readily agreed with my request that I'd do it. The night before I was supposed to leave, I got a cablegram. He had been killed. Went on in the next morning, took off at 2:30 in the morning, landed over there about 6:30 that morning and landed. And went on over to the squadron to talk to some of his squadron mates over there. They were gone. They were already gone, headed out on a mission there, so I did not get to talk to him. But I went over there, and they had buried him on a little island over there on the very eastern side of the Marshall Islands there. None of you can remember this, and I have a time with it. Inilobigin, the island of Inilobigin. One of the most beautiful places on earth I had been to at that time. The natives, years before, when the British had that territory, they set out palm trees to get the nuts and the oil, palm oil and so forth. And these palm trees, I honestly believe they were 100 feet tall. Way up there, and these breezes just blowing back and forth, and it was just beautiful. The natives had got out there in the lagoon out there and dug up agate, which is a kind of a glassy looking rock, and they dug this agate up and made walls. The Army had an Army cemetery out there, 400 feet, 400 feet, 400 feet, 400 feet, and just as level as this floor. They had no instruments, nothing whatsoever, but the naked eye, the bare eye, and they set that up, and they had that around this area here. And as far as I was concerned, I would like for my brother to have remained there forever. But my mother said he did not like Hawaii for whatever reason when he was stationed in Hawaii. And she related that to Hawaii, so she wanted him brought back to Thomasville, and they did. Brought him back here and buried him here in Thomasville. Now that was, you might say, the saddest part of my cruise that I had into the Pacific during World War II. Question? Yes, sir.
I was just wondering on your, I know with your crew, there was you as a pilot, you had a turret gunner. Did I understand you to say that you had a navigator as well? Is there a crew of 3 on that team?
It had the pilot, and it had a gunner. He had a 50 caliber turret gun, and then I had down what we called in the bilge, down in the lower end of the plane, we had a radio radar operator, and he had a little 30 caliber, we call a little stinger, that fired out from the rear there. So there's a crew of 3 there, which kind of brings up something else. We had a flight surgeon aboard the ship who had never flown off the ship. He had never flown off, even though he was the flight surgeon. When he came aboard, he walked aboard while the ship was tied up at port somewhere. But anyway, he wanted to fly. So one night, about 11 o'clock, I didn't need a gunner. I had my radio radar operator, but I didn't need a gunner at 11 o'clock at night. So I went out and said, Doc, I got a seat open if you want to ride. And it was black. And we were right on the edge of a typhoon. And ship, just like this. He went around, he scrounged up, got some flight gear, borrowed some flight gear from everybody. And we went out and flew around. And I don't know if any of you ever heard of it or know what it is, but out in the Western Pacific area, when you're flying through there, you pick up what you call Elmo's fire. Big burst of fire, blaze of fire, about 3-4 feet in diameter. And you'd get one, maybe it'd land on the prop of your plane, go over to your wingtip, back on the tail, back on the prop, whatever. But anyway, it'd go around on your plane all over that. And finally got used to it. And I figured that would just scare the daylights out of him. He came back, we came back and landed about 3 hours later, and they couldn't shut him up. He was back just telling everybody how much fun he had. And it was raining, storming, the ship was going like this, and he enjoyed it just the same there. So that's one of the things that you might say that we had there. Question?
In your time, can you estimate how many carrier traps you made?
Big pardon?
How many arrested landings you made on the carrier? I mean,
Pretty close to 250. Counting day and night landings, about 250 landings. You never got used to it. You had to work at it every time you did it. I mean, you had to concentrate on it.
Did you ever miss it?
Exactly. Yeah, and the object was to land as far back as you could. You got 12 cables across the flight deck, and these tables are about 10, 12 feet apart, and the one furthest aft is the slackest. If you catch that one, you got a nice, soft, easy stop. Brings you to a nice, soft. You catch that last one, number 12, and your eyeballs go out about 3 inches. I mean, it'll stop you. Yes, sir.
The Granger was one of the things that the information I have on it, I'm a hobbyist and got a little information stuff on it, was one of the easiest to land on a carrier. Is that, can you comment on it? Of all the Navy planes, like the Wildcat, the Hellcat, and all those, and this was the easiest.
I don't think it ever got easy. You got used to it and you did it, but you had to come in, I mean, at the exact right speed. We had the landing signal officer back on the port side, on the left side, right near the very back of the flight deck, and he had paddles, just like tennis rackets. And he had these, if he gave you this is what we call a Roger, straight out. You were coming in just right. Everything was fine. If you came in too fast, he dropped it down. And you usually want to come in like on the Avenger. Stalling speed on that was about 76 knots, which is about 80 miles an hour. You come in at 76 knots, and he wanted you to come in at about 3 or 4 knots above that. I mean, you were just sitting there. If you were coming in too slow, he afraid you're going to stall out and fall in the water. He started giving you this. Come on, come on, come on, come on. And if you're coming in too high, you got this. Coming in too low. We had the signals to get you right as you came in there. And you had to learn those, and if you didn't do it, it didn't matter what your rank was or what your position was. If you were flying and landing on a carrier, and if you came in and screwed it up, the landing signal officer will take you back somewhere in a closet somewhere and chew you out and tell you how you should be doing it. And you do it or you quit flying off of it. Once you landed, everything's fine. But I've seen guys go around 4 and 5 times. He'd come around, give them a wave off, and they'd have to throw the power to it, take off, come on around, and make another approach. And if you come in, like I said, too low, too fast, too high, whatever, they would slow you down, speed you up, raise you up, whatever had to be done to get you back in what we call get you in the groove, where you could come in and make a proper landing there. See, sometimes they've had planes come in and never even catch a wire and go up and maybe hit planes that were stored on the flight deck up forward of your landing area there. So you wipe out maybe 2 other airplanes in addition to your own. So you had to do what he told you, and you had to do it the way he told you to do it.
I was in a reserve squadron down in Jacksonville Naval Air Station at the start of the Korean War and got activated. I was riding in the back seat of a TBM on the weekends and had a lot of fun riding at them. But went into a Corsair squadron and stayed in during the Korean War. But what's important is that we've had a continuing reunion of some of our folks since we got out in 1952 and had lost one of our pilots that had flown and got shot down in the Battle of Lady Gulf in BF-60. And I had been the spokesman trying to find lost people, and I finally located this fella after 52 years. And he was at our last reunion, which we had 3 or 4 months ago, and looked just like he did back then. But he got shot down off the coast of Leyte and went into some island, and it was occupied by the Japanese and was later picked up by submarine. But this is real nostalgia to me.
Yeah.
And,
Well, from what you're telling, it sounds pretty close to me like you and I may have flown a time or two together, because I was in the squadron there at Jacksonville, flying in the torpedo squadron there. And so you and I could have had a flight together or know somebody that did, yeah. Yeah.
But it was, like you say, it was a great airplane, and we had Corsairs after we got rid of the TVM.
Oh, yeah.
It was really a great airplane.
Well, I flew the Corsairs after I got back and was put in the squadron. I instructed in Corsairs. It's just a beautiful, wonderful plane to fly. I thoroughly enjoyed it there. I only had one, you might say, aircraft accident in all the years, the hours that I flew, and I had over 5,000 hours of flying. I had one accident when I was at the aircraft factory up at Trenton, New Jersey, taking new planes off the production line. We had to take them out, inventory them, go out and test fly them, take them up, stall, spin, everything, do a couple of landings. I had one of those planes that I had taken up, came in for landing, the right landing gear folded up, collapsed on it. They found out later on they'd left a boat, one big boat that should have been there holding that in place. They left that boat off. That's the only accident I ever had, civilian flying, military flying, whatever. And I flew, like I said, I went through test pilot school, and I flew just about everything they had in the Navy. I said, I won't fly your blimps. I got some pride left, and I won't fly blimps. But I flew helicopters, jets, seaplanes, flew it all. I had some pride. I would not fly blimps.
What is your opinion of these modern jet aircraft, like the F/A-18 and the current, front line attack and fighter aircraft? You think what's next? Pilotless? I'd just say it probably about the same. Not knowing the real differences, I just have to say that, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. How's our time? Are we about running out of time?
Well, we want to leave you time to sign books. But I want to thank you so much, and we want to thank Joe Chesnut. If you look at the picture of the World War II vets up here who were interviewed when the Historical Society published Answering the Call, Commander Horton's front and center in that picture. He was interviewed then, and he is included in that book. But Joe brought to our attention that he had just published this book, and we quickly put together a program to time with the fly-in, and don't you think it was nice that Ken Burns ran that whole series as a lead-up to our doing that? We can't really claim credit for that, but we do thank you for sharing.
I've been in Birmingham. I got started with 5th graders in school. Would you believe? My granddaughter, she was in the 5th grade, and the teacher asked one of them if, do y'all have a daddy or grandfather or somebody like that served in World War II? They were studying in their history class about World War II. My granddaughter and I think maybe one or two others put up her hand, and that night the teacher called me and asked me if I would come in and talk to them. I've been talking to them every year since then. Since then I've talked to 3 schools and about World War II, somewhat like talking to you here. And these children, one thing about it, they raise their hand and they ask questions. They ask questions on and on. And of course, that tells you right then that they're interested. They're hearing what you're saying and you get their interest. And that's really what you want to do then. All right. Okay, thank you so much.
I want you to meet also while you're here, Commander Horton's daughter, Susan Allen, and her husband, Morgan, are in the back. And their son is over here, Kenneth Horton Jr., and a nephew and niece have come down from Thomasville, Georgia. And you'll have to help me with your name again. But we very much appreciate your having your family here. Susan's going to be selling copies of Commander Horton's book in the back, and he'll be signing copies up here and in between their refreshments. So please help yourself and buy a copy of the book to learn more of his stories. Thank you for coming.